Good evening. My name is Nancy Smith, and I am your FLAIR president, and I want to welcome you. All of us know this is an exciting time for First Ladies, as the last few days have showed us, and it is a wonderful time to have this program. Please know that in October, we will be doing the Republican Ladies campaigning component of this. FLAIR has many other exciting things coming up, so please watch our webpage and emails to get more information. I'm excited about tonight's program, which Paulette Brinka suggested, and will introduce the topic and the panelists. I want to thank our institutional lifetime members, including American University School of Public Affairs, the Massachusetts Historical Society, the White House Historical Association, the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation Library and Museum, the George W. Bush Institute, the Center for Presidential History at SMU, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Dole Institute of Politics, and our newest lifetime institutional member, the National Archives and Records Administration. Our collaborative projects with our lifetime institutional members and with FLAIR lifetime individual members, such as East Wing, and all FLAIR members are illustrative of the important relationship that FLAIR forms with its members in getting and fulfilling its mission to promote research, education, and knowledge about U.S. First Ladies and their important legacies. And right now, I would like to particularly thank East Wing because it has been running very interesting articles on the conventions and the speeches. And so please watch for those. It is now my pleasure to turn over the program to FLAIR member Paulette Brinka, Adjunct Associate Professor in the Department of Communications Arts, Suffolk County Community College. And I look forward, Paulette, to this interesting program and to being part of it. Paulette?
Thanks very much, Nancy. As the Democrats meet for their convention this week, we are examining the role of the candidate's spouse as a campaign surrogate. Campaign 2024 certainly has its unique elements. In terms of potential first families, you have a spouse who has been largely absent from the campaign trail. On the other hand, the possibility of a first gentleman. So tonight we are looking at four first ladies in the modern era. Lady Bird Johnson, Rosalynn Carter, Hillary Clinton, and Michelle Obama were all out front and center during their respective election cycles. We'll look at how each functioned during their husband's quest for the White House and how they handled often rough and tough campaigns. Our plan is to do this chronologically. So first, I'm going to turn it back to Nancy and her presentation on Lady Bird Johnson. Nancy?
Thank you, Paula. Tonight, I am going to talk about three significant things that Lady Bird Johnson did in the 1964 campaign. The first, and many people don't think about this, is that she convinced Lyndon Johnson to run. He was very depressed in August of 1964, and he was thinking of not running. Part of his depression was that he did not think he could be elected because the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which he got passed with major legislative achievement for him, he felt that the South would bolt and that people wouldn't vote for him. So in August of 25th, Lady Bird writes to Lyndon, and she says, "To step out now would be wrong for your country, and I can see nothing but a lonely wasteland for your future. Your friends would be frozen in embarrassed silence, and your enemies jeering." She also wrote him not to run in 1968 She felt that he would have accomplished all he needed to accomplish, and because of a serious heart attack he had in 1955, she did not really feel he would live out a second term. She told me in an interview I did with her in 1987, quote, "I think one of the few times I was just darn positive about what Lyndon ought to do was that he ought to run in August of 1964 and that he ought not to run 4 years later. That was a firm conviction from which I never did waver and which I wrote out in memos." So clearly that is one crucial thing that Lady Bird did. The second, and she did many, but the second I'm going to focus on is that in the summer of 1964, civil rights leaders were pushing an alternative Mississippi delegation called the Mississippi Freedom Delegation to be seated because they had not been involved in the choice of the delegates at the convention. And there was a lot of pressure on Lyndon Johnson in terms of what he would do. He turns to Mrs. Johnson and actually asks her to write a draft statement for him. She does, and the draft statement says essentially that he favors the seating of the legal delegation, but that he will continue to work for civil rights as he has throughout his career, and he will work toward making the process more inclusive. That is another incredible thing that she did for the campaign, that Lyndon Johnson trusted her so much that she essentially wrote out what he ended up saying. And then, of course, and you're looking at it on the slide, her historic solo whistle stop tour on the Lady Bird special through the South, 8 states, October 6th through the 9th, 1964. She gave 47 speeches when she previously hadn't liked giving speeches in small towns and large. The reason she went is because the South was her home, and she called it the trip a journey of the heart. And this is what she said, part of what she said: "I have a strong sentimental family deep tied to the South, and I thought the South was getting a bad rap from the nation and indeed the world. It was painted as a bastion of ignorance, and it was my country. And although I knew I couldn't be persuasive to them, at least I could talk to them in the language they would understand." The trip was planned at a time when women were not that involved in politics by 3 women: Lady Bird Johnson, Liz Carpenter, who was her press secretary, and Beth Sable, the social secretary. And they could not get the attention of Kenny O'Donnell, who was a carryover Kennedy appointee and was an aide to President Johnson. So Liz Carpenter, who was very close to President Johnson, went to his office and told him, brought out a map, told him about what Mrs. Johnson was going to do. And he got so excited, he called Kenny O'Donnell up, and Liz said Kenny changed from not giving them any attention to giving them full support. And one thing that people don't normally understand is that Lyndon Johnson didn't ask Mrs. Johnson to make this trip. Mrs. Johnson told me it was her decision, and he was very supportive of doing the trip. The trip was under very dangerous conditions. It was extremely dangerous in the South. They were fearful for Lyndon Johnson to even go into the South. And they ran an engine because of bomb threats 15 minutes in front of the train in case there was a bombing. It was a very effective use of media. She was accompanied by her daughters, Linda and Lucy, a lot of Democratic wives. And the train was originally only supposed to have 55 press and ended up with 225. And the trip was heavily covered as a media event. And with television coverage, it was estimated that 500,000 people watched. Now, when she went into these small towns and large, she often got booed and heckled. But she would put up a white gloved hand, and you can see it in some videos where she would say very politely, "You've had your say, now I have mine." And she went to the South to push civil rights, to tell them that it was a burden if they didn't accept the implementation of the Civil Rights Act, and that it was important for them to do that. The trip was very successful. It was credited with helping Lyndon win 3 Southern states in the 1964 election at a time when it was very feared that the Democrats would bolt that the Southern Democrats would bolt the Democratic Party. Mrs. Johnson's last stop was in New Orleans, where Lyndon Johnson joined her. He joined her on 3 stops. And what she said is so relevant for today. Part of what she said in her speech is, we are testing as a nation whether we shall move forward with an understanding of each other or whether we shall move backward. This is, I believe, a contrast between the positive and the negative. So I have just chosen today to focus on 3 crucial things that Lady Bird did in campaigning in 1964. She, of course, did many others, but these are the 3 that I think are the real highlights. And now I will turn it over to my good friend, Paulette Brinka.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm Mrs. Jimmy Carter, and my husband is running for president. Now, that line sounds familiar. It mirrors her husband's first sentence at the Democratic National Convention in 1976. The goal of those introductory lines is clear: to help the electorate make the acquaintance of a one-term governor of Georgia. Rosalynn noted that often enough, the response to that opening remark was, "President of what?" Or, "You've got to be kidding." Or, "I didn't even know this was an election year." Jimmy and Rosalynn considered themselves full partners in whatever they undertook. So where did this potential presidential couple come from? Eleanor Rosalynn Smith Carter was born in Plains, Georgia. The nurse who delivered her was none other than Lillian Carter, Jimmy's mother, and they met when Rosalynn was 3 days old. The couple married young, and Rosalynn became a Navy wife and the mother of 3 young sons. Amy came later. She traveled with Jimmy around the country and found that being on her own while Jimmy was deployed gave her the independence she craved. That ended when Jimmy's father died, and Jimmy made the unilateral decision to return to Plains and run the family business, a peanut farm. This exemplified a very interesting dynamic in their marriage and partnership, that he would make the ultimate decision, there she is, he would make the ultimate decision without consulting her, no matter how much she might protest. In her words, "He makes up his mind and I follow along. That's how it is." One day she was surprised to see Jimmy put on a pair of dress pants in the middle of the week. He told her he was on his way to file papers to run for the state Senate. She didn't know he was even interested in politics. But once he decided to run, she was all in. According to author Katie Martin, the Carters approached campaigning with the same dogged determination that they brought to farming. They both had a powerful competitive streak. During the Senate campaign, for example, Rosalynn called every registered voter in their native Sumner County. She reported that her ears hurt, her mouth was cracked, and her voice was hoarse. But as they say, she persisted. The second slide, please. Rosalynn worked on each of Jimmy's campaigns, and they developed successful strategies for reaching voters and gaining support. As the 1976 campaign for president approached, she developed several rules of the road. The first was stop at courthouses. They are good sources of information. Who are the influential people in the community? What was the gossip? Second, insist on the front page or news part of the newspapers for interviews. No society or women's pages. 3, look for radio and television antennas. Chances are the stations are nearby, giving potential interviewers the opportunity to talk to her. And just in case, she had a list of questions that they might ask her. 4, stay in people's homes while on the road. We learn about them and their issues. They feel committed to the campaign. And it's cheaper, too. Her final rule was muster up the courage to intrude, crash meetings, events, carnivals, and so forth, and ask for time to deliver your message. Apologize after. The family traveled around the country, either singly or in pairs, to spread their time and their influence. There was also the Peanut Brigade. Organized by Aide Hamilton Jordan, it was initially made up of fellow Georgians who traveled all over the country at their own expense. They made phone calls, they appeared on local radio and television shows, and they organized local workers. Rosalynn clearly enjoyed politics more than her husband did and showed considerable political savvy. For example, as she was campaigning in South Dakota, Morris Udall was expected to win the South Dakota primary. Rosalynn thought a visit from Jimmy would turn the tide. He did, and he won. She described the primary campaign and the general election as a very demanding job with pressures and deadlines, a job that required constant studying and cramming to stay current and be able to stay cool under fire. But she also described those qualities as essential. Could I have the third slide, please? When all was said and done, Carter defeated Jerry Ford, and the partners from Plains were on their way to the White House. Now, some political theorists believe that Carter's victory was an anomaly. The Watergate scandal, Ford's pardon of Nixon, sent voters to look for a fresh face, and Carter filled that bill. 1980 was a whole different story. Carter was now the incumbent with a record to defend. There was inflation, the oil embargo, the energy crisis. There was a strong challenge from Senator Edward Kennedy for the nomination. There was Billygate, charges that Jimmy's brother accepted $220,000 from Libya. And of course, there was the Iran hostage crisis. Americans seized from the U.S. Embassy and held for more than a year. Jimmy was determined to obtain their release, even at the expense of his re-election campaign. So Rosalynn hit the road. Next slide, please. Rosalynn campaigned several days a week. The questions on the campaign trail changed from what's the president doing about the hostage situation to why doesn't he do something? In her autobiography, First Lady from Plains, she wrote, I also had to counter accusations from our political opponents in the press that Jimmy was hiding in the Rose Garden, or even, as one ludicrous rumor had it, was having a nervous breakdown. Jimmy wasn't hiding. He was giving his complete attention to the crises involving our nation. She also noted that he had sensitive information that he did not want to accidentally disclose. And there was the rise of evangelicals. Rosalynn was stopped during an appearance at a Texas shopping center by a group of women holding their hands up with printed cards pasted in their palms that said, "You don't love Jesus." An interesting charge given the Carters' deep faith and activity in their home church. "I do love Jesus," I said to some of them. Their replies, "If you love Jesus, you won't support the ERA." Interesting. The last slide, please. Rosalynn was convinced that Jimmy would win, that the arguments for victory were clear, but Ronald Reagan won the election in a historic landslide, something that became apparent as Election Day approached. Both Jimmy and Rosalynn took their defeat hard. She described the scene in the Oval Office when we gathered at 6 o'clock with Charlie Curbo and his wife Boo, Bob Strauss, and Jimmy's closest staff members. Pat Cadell confirmed that the exit polls showed we were losing overwhelmingly. Someone said, "Mr. President, you're a great example. You don't seem bitter at all." "I'm bitter enough for the both of us," she said. Yes, I was bitter, and so was everyone else in the room, but I was the only one who admitted it. The Carter Post presidency became one of the most successful in history. The Carter Center is credited with eradicating disease and ensuring free and fair elections abroad. They were both active in Habitat for Humanity, and Rosalynn made her peace with returning to Plains, the small town she left as a Navy wife hoping to see the world. So, what was Rosalynn's role in her husband's political career? Katie Martin wrote, "Few believe he could have been elected without Rosalynn." Gerald Rafshoon, the Atlanta advertising executive who helped shape Jimmy's image, noted that Rosalynn was a more natural politician than her husband. She was good door to door. He couldn't do that. He wasn't much good at retail politics. He was a solitary man with a fantastic ego. Rosalynn was down to earth, feminine and strong, every inch the self-made woman. In the eyes of the world, she humanized him, and unlike him, she enjoyed the world of politics. She wrote at the end of her autobiography, "I would be out there campaigning right now if Jimmy would run again. I miss the world of politics. Nothing is more thrilling than the urgency of a campaign, the planning, the strategy sessions, getting out among people you'd never otherwise meet, and the tremendous energy that makes a victory ever so sweet and a loss so devastating. I'd like the people to know that we were right, that what Jimmy Carter was doing was the best for our country, and that people made a mistake by not voting for him. But when all is said and done, our loss at the polls is the biggest single reason I'd like to be back in the White House. I don't like to lose." Okay, next we have a look at Hillary Clinton with Janette. Where she's somewhere. Okay.
All right.
Janette.
Thank you, Paulette and Nancy. It's wonderful to be with you all tonight and to learn a little bit about everyone. Paulette, do you need to do more here with the introduction? Or are we good? Can I get started?
I think I need to disappear.
Okay, thank you. And we can get rid of the bio then. So thank you. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about Hillary Clinton, and you can go ahead and put up the first slide. Thank you. It's impossible to talk about campaigns without talking about Hillary and the work she has done through her entire life. So I want to spend a brief moment of time just looking at her work longitudinally and from some of the very beginning. If you go to the next slide, please. We can't think about Hillary without thinking about where she came from and where she started. And in thinking about the fact she started in Chicago in a family that was very focused on hard work, public service, frugality, a strong Methodist background, a real sense of being a public servant. And that started at a very young age for Hillary and just followed her throughout her life. I love where she's talked about she had a conservative mind and a liberal heart. It began to shape who she was. And as she went through college, she began to really frame her views on that. Next slide, please. So becoming Clinton was quite a romance. You know, it's interesting to talk about Hillary because she has been in the public sphere for so long, and we all know so much about her given running for presidency and so forth. But it's good to go back to where she began and think about her work and when she first was working and going to school at Yale and met Bill, fell in love after some back and forth, and finally decided to follow him to Arkansas to go down and see what that would be like, even though many people were saying you're crazy to even think about that. If you look at the pictures here, you'll see just some wonderful shots of where she was in her youth, and especially look at her hair, look at the ways in which she was engaged with Bill, and was a wonderful shaping of who she was even then. The picture in the bottom, one where Bill and Hillary are talking at the microphone, and you can see the early hairstyles. It's quite an evolution. Next slide, please. the reason why following him and going to Arkansas was so important was because this is where it really began to shape her abilities and what she did as a campaigner. This is the a list of several of the campaigns that happened when they were in Arkansas, and this is from Southern Primer. Hillary Goes to Arkansas, in a book that you will hear in a moment from Katie Sibley talking about. She wrote this, edited this book on Southern First Ladies. And I wanted to give you this slide to show, before they even get to the 1992 campaign where Bill runs for president, she's been involved in 7 of his campaigns prior to that. And within that time is an amazing coming to age and understanding of who she was and what she needed to do in her time. Hillary was the first in so many ways, as we are well aware when we look at her history. And in this case, she went to Arkansas, got right in the middle of helping Bill Clinton run, especially when it came to, they married in 1975, and when he started running from attorney general and then on to the governor. Now, there were many campaigns, of course, because at that time, the Arkansas governor's race happened every 2 years. So they got a lot of experience during this time. The really critical years were when Bill lost in 1980 to a man named Frank White. And then when they came back again in 1982, they win the campaign. But the real turning point was during that time, there was tremendous criticism about Hillary Clinton, Hillary Rodham at the time, and how she showed up in the governor's mansion, how she got too involved in many ways and was overly engaged in ways that she shouldn't be, and just a number of things. And God forbid she should keep her name and not take Bill Clinton's. And so between that, the critiques of her hair and how she carried herself, there was a major transformation that began to happen, especially in 1982, when they got back into the governor's mansion, in large part because Hillary was out there, had transformed in many ways, and was really shaping a lot of the rhetoric for Bill Clinton's campaigns. So they go on and continue to do well in Arkansas, and then the call to run for 1992 campaign. So next slide, please. Of course, that's a campaign where some of the things you learn in Arkansas don't always translate to the big screen. And in some ways they do because they got elected, but some of the ways that were set up in terms of the 2 for the price of 1, the sense of if you get 1, you're going to get you're going to get us all, deeply shaped how that campaign ran, and then of course how it was managed after that, and the expectations when Bill went into the White House for what he could do and how he could engage Hillary in work such as the healthcare legislation. Of course, down in the bottom corner of this particular slide is the interesting, famous picture that many of us have seen when they appear on 60 Minutes together. And Bill is having to talk about defending himself and how he responded with the various allegations. And basically, Hillary was there. She's been transformed over time, and she's very clear that she's going to be a strong person and stand up for him, and going to not be the one just serving cookies in the White House. And so that was a really interesting turning point and a place of real strength, as we saw from a potential first lady. Next, please. Of course, then we went to the 1996 campaign, and by then things are pretty settled in the White House as far as these various roles. We've been through numerous situations, and of course, Hillary's learned a lot in terms of the expectations for what she should be doing in the White House. But in 1996, that's a real shaping of the family, and you see several covers here that illustrate that and talk about the whole first family and the sense of even, how the Clintons worked was also with the Gores, so a big family in that sense. So very comfortable in that space in campaigning. Next, please. So, of course, beyond the White House, if we continue to think about the first for Hillary, and I'm not going to spend any time really on this slide, just to say that look at all the additional campaigning that she has done and the way that has transformed, especially in the ways that women can show up in these spaces, and a wonderful campaigner. Next slide, please. The lessons learned, I think there's several things I just want to touch on quickly. One is that culture matters, and campaigning, so much of what happens in how Hillary responded to the ways that Bill was campaigning in different places, and we think about the early time in Arkansas, the culture is going to matter in terms of how people respond to how much she can be involved, and how is that really appropriate. Partnership is great, but sometimes maybe not too much. Sometimes there's a time when Hillary had to step back and just let Bill lead and manage that process. We know also what works in the South may not always smoothly translate to the nation, and certainly the Clintons learned that early on. Always Hillary faced the challenge of being first, and especially in the campaign process. And, this is an interesting time to have this forum because we are in the middle of the Democratic National Convention. And if anyone watched Hillary's speech the other night and saw the amazing ovation that she had, it's really clear she's been a quintessential campaigner for so many years, close to 50 years. And it was just a wonderful moment to see her honored in that way at the convention the other night. So I think that's all I want to say right now to leave time for others, but thank you, and I will pass it back to Paulette.
Okay. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Janet. She was a force to be reckoned with Monday night for sure. The last First Lady we are going to look at in some detail this evening is Michelle Obama. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie Sibley. Katie?
Thank you so much. I'm ready for the first slide. Sam, thank you. So thank you, everyone. We're at the last First Lady now in our presentation. And of course, very fittingly, she spoke last night at the convention, and I will get to that later in my presentation. So Michelle Obama, like a First Lady a century before, was a natural campaigner, is a natural campaigner. Crowds loved her, just as they loved Florence Harding, and both brought great energy to their campaigning. Next slide, please. Like Florence, Michelle quickly became a celebrity too, a glow that surrounds her to this day. Next slide, please. And did I mention that both women's love for opening the White House grounds to the public and engaging them there, very similar in that way. But beyond these comparisons, Mrs. Obama's record is absolutely unique and distinctive in the annals of First Lady campaigning. So I'm going to say goodbye to Florence now and move on to look more closely at Michelle Obama. Let's start with 2008. May I have the next slide, please? So first, she had young children, which is something that was shared by only two other First Ladies in the past century. She was also working full-time, and even beyond that. I think we can go back to Edith Roosevelt for the second example, and of course, Rosalynn Carter as well. She was also working full-time when the campaign began, something rare until the recent past, and in work that directly related to her husband's campaign promises. His concern for healthcare and her own efforts became part of the campaign there. Now, most importantly, she was, of course, the first Black woman to be an integral part of her husband's campaigning for the presidency. And in this, she faced both extra scrutiny as well as threats, leading to the Secret Service protection that they got nearly 2 years before entering the White House. They also encountered many Americans' assumptions, from whatever basis, about who should be in the White House. Nevertheless, Michelle became a highly popular campaigner. The Obama team would call her the closer because of how many people did sign up once they'd heard her speak. Next slide, please. She certainly got, that year, 2008, far more attention than Cindy McCain, and even was designated Woman of the Year, although getting attention by itself isn't necessarily positive, as Sarah Palin's example shows. And Michelle did face challenges that year. Next slide, please. In February of 2008, while campaigning in Wisconsin, she noted, quote, "For the first time in my adult lifetime, I'm really proud of my country because I think people are hungry for change." She had offered similar comments earlier without much notice, but as her husband pointed out, this time it was diced, clipped, and weaponized. I'm quoting him here. "My team and I largely deserve the blame. We put her on the road without the speech writing and prep sessions that I had at all times. The infrastructure that kept me organized, it was like sending a civilian into live fire without a flak jacket." Mrs. McCain took a jab at Mrs. Obama in this moment, as this headline suggests, but a few months later defended her very graciously. "I do not think that spouses and family members are fair game in campaigns," quoting her. And her predecessor, Mrs. Obama's predecessor, Laura Bush, supported her too. "I think she probably meant I'm more proud, is what she really meant," said Laura Bush. Yet it all deeply upset Mrs. Obama, who was prepared to step down from the campaign, wanting only to be an asset to her husband's election. But he would hear none of it. "She was a far more compelling figure than I would ever be," he said. "People related to her, and she kept him focused and grounded." But unfortunately, as a Black woman, she also had to deal with racist, gendered stereotypes that came out in the campaign. Many, of course, continue to hold on to the idea that the First Lady should be a white woman. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Drawing on the history of white supremacy that had long shrouded the White House from its very beginnings until well into the 20th century. Thus, for a Fox commentator, a gentle fist tap between Michelle and Barack Obama became a, quote, terrorist fist jab in June 2008. A more supportive outlet than Vox, The New Yorker, lampooned such paranoid attitudes, but did the couple no favors by featuring Michelle on the cover in July 2008, carrying an AK-47 and Barack in Muslim garb, fist bumping each other as an American flag burns in the fireplace. Next slide, please. Moreover, her taut arms and exotic sounding name, according to sociologists Carmen Lugo and Mary Bloodworth Lugo, when filtered through the lens of 9/11, frightened some Americans who believed she should stop wearing sleeveless dresses because her muscles made her daunting. Somehow people were not frightened by Jacqueline Kennedy's biceps. Of course, Michelle's physicality would make her a fashion icon, inspiring millions of women, men, and children to become more active with her first initiative, Let's Move. But even liberal journalist Maureen Dowd, who loved Michelle Obama's arms in 2009, decided there was something too powerful about her in 2012, the second campaign. When Mrs. Obama humorously referred to her husband smoking, sock dropping, and leaving out the butter, Dowd called her, quote, a princess of South Chicago who was emasculating Barack. Unwittingly or not, in this way, Dowd played right into the Amos and Andy Sapphire stereotype of the overbearing, angry Black woman. Would Dowd really have preferred Michelle adopt the more adoring gaze of some previous first ladies? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thanks. Regardless, by 2012, Michelle had become a media star and a highly popular role model. Her North Star, as one of her close advisors told me, was to be always value added to her husband's work, and she had succeeded brilliantly. Among her signature issues were those which emphasized her role as wife, mother, and supporter of children and veterans, and these would only grow as the years ahead progressed, with the launching of initiatives like Let Girls Learn in 2015. Next slide, please. Of course, that wasn't enough for West Virginian resident Bobby Lucier, who in 2012 told Ari Shapiro of NPR that Michelle Obama, quote, doesn't look or act like a first lady. Lucier thought they should look like Jackie Kennedy. But in 2012, While critics and haters too never went away, Michelle was no longer caricatured in the mainstream media as she had been in 2008. Instead, in her history of being a working mother, in comparison to the more privileged life of Ann Romney, whose husband noted she drove a couple of Cadillacs, Michelle's struggles seemed to be more authentic. Her own style also elevated her in 2012. Even though she's able to look like she is above the fray, she's out there campaigning. She's out there fundraising, said journalist Jodi Kantor, adding, the contradiction of first ladyhood is that the less overtly political a first lady seems, the more politically effective she is. Next slide, please. Mrs. Obama continues influencing politics 8 years after leaving office. She has spoken at every convention since 2008, and of course, she was there in 2004 as well, when her husband made a highly significant speech leading to his election 4 years later. Last night was no exception. Her speech was powerful. If anyone saw it, or read about it, they will likely want to learn more about that. Touching on themes of family, hard work, and action, and all with her signature humor and empathy. And her husband felt a bit chagrined to follow her. Next slide, please. Her endorsement last month with her husband for Kamala Harris was significant and went viral, as she noted, quote, I can't have this phone call without saying to my girl Kamala that I am so proud of you. This is going to be historic. One of her current organizations, When We All Vote, has joined with other groups to register younger voters and people of color. There's no question she will continue to play a role in future campaigns, even as she pursues a number of other concerns. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. It is a pleasure to be in your company this evening and hear such interesting stories about the lives we all study so hard and so long. I don't know that there are any questions from viewers as yet, but I had one actually. It is clear that Hillary and Rosalynn really enjoyed campaigning. Did Lady Bird and Michelle enjoy it as much, or did they have to be sort of dragged into it?
I think,
go ahead, Nancy.
For Lady Bird, I didn't go over her beginning life, but she had been in public life for so long. She grew to enjoy campaigning. She used teas very similar to what Rosalynn did. They were both from the South and Lady Bird from the Southwest, and was very effective for carrying Texas for Kennedy in the 1960 campaign, and Robert Kennedy even credited her. I think she grew to enjoy it, just like I think that Michelle Obama grew to enjoy it. I don't think she initially liked it, but I'll let Katie speak to that.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right, Nancy. You know, initially when the moments in 2008 where she was being very harshly criticized, she offered to step away. She said, I never really asked, to be in the spotlight. That was not something necessarily I wanted. But then she definitely became such an effective campaigner that it's I think, so really striking that she's continued to appear at every convention. She's continued to be courted and pursued to campaign. And she's clearly, her speech last night, I think, was probably one of the best we've seen, I think, of many of the other campaigners there at the convention. So she definitely, I think, grew in the role and has realized what a powerful force she can be with her voice. So I think it is interesting. It's a fantastic opportunity for these women to have been able to have these roles and to transcend some of the critics that were really kind of nitpicking them at the beginning.
And Paulette, if I could just add, of the 4 first ladies we're talking about, actually Lady Bird and Michelle both were hesitant to be in politics. And when Lyndon was heavily courting Lady Bird, like he wanted to marry her the first day they went on a date, she wrote him, "Lyndon, I don't know what the deal is, but I hope it's not politics." And of course, Michelle was famous
Oops.
for not wanting to, when Barack said he was running for the state Senate, she said, in Illinois, she said, "Well, I think that's dumb, but, go ahead and do it." And the only reason she ended up approving him running for president was, as she said, she didn't think he would win.
Yeah, and I mean, something
So,
I think, Nancy, you said in your book, in your chapter that you wrote in my book, the companion text that you wrote with Diana about her was, I think, very compelling in this regard, which is that she really saw herself and became a role model for so many people, children, people of color, women, men, all kinds of people. She's become a role model, and I think the campaigning has allowed that, right? Being out there and being visible, it really makes you much more effective. And, even today where she's not running for anything, she ever has actually run for any political office, she is using the work that she's doing to kind of promote causes that help other people be empowered. So I think it's a really interesting way the campaigns that she's been in have promoted that possibility for her to be able to kind of promote activism. And I think she's certainly, last night, I think we saw that, that sort of strong call for action. Yeah.
And she completely stole the show last night. It was just so amazing. I remember when she came to George Mason to campaign for Hillary Clinton. And that was such an amazing time to hear her as a first lady to talk about Hillary and what Hillary, knowing what life is like as a first lady, being willing to get up there and run for president, aware of the dangers and the challenges every day. And here's Michelle. It's just a wonderful moment to see these first ladies supporting one another in a whole different kind of context like that.
That's a great point.
I would, when you think back on the political campaigns we've all kind of experienced, I remember when, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is 1984, when Barbara Bush made an unfortunate comment about Geraldine Ferraro, which she apologized for afterwards. So the question is, what boundaries do candidate spouses have in terms of issues and attacking an opponent? Are there boundaries, do you think?
I think they have to be very careful. Of course, Lady Bird was very careful, and she was not geared that way. But I think that most candidates' wives are very careful on that issue.
I mean, Janette, do you want to say something about Hillary? Because I'm thinking of when, she sort of made that comment about the right-wing conspiracy, how she got piled on there, right? I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I think that there are those boundaries, but when you decide you're going to be one of those who breaks those boundaries, you're going to be a partnership that's campaigning, that, there's that, you end up being put into that difficult situation of being critiqued exactly like that, and being so much of, you can't have one without the other, and so forth. So in many cases, it was Hillary that would be that attacker, and it would allow Bill to be his sweet, congenial self, and she was the one who would be out there like, an attack dog. So, but again, the press and the coverage of that has, incredible negative, and that's why still at this day people will say, there's something about her I just don't like, too abrasive, etc. Yeah.
Right. And that's why I think it'll be
But
so interesting. Go ahead, Nancy. I'll finish.
On Lady Bird, I mean, what is very interesting in terms, she didn't attack her spouse's opponent. That wasn't her style. But the campaign, Whistle Stop, was about civil rights in the South. And her life was threatened. She was dealing with an extremely substantive and controversial issue. And so I think that first ladies sometimes are, lead the way on issues. She certainly did not shy away from, and it was, again, not suggested by President Johnson. She chose to go to the South to talk to them in language they understood and tell them what a burden. And certainly Betty Ford and Rosalynn Carter tackled key issues, as did Hillary and Michelle.
Right.
And go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that when Michelle was attacked in 2008 for that comment, which again she'd said before, but it was really taken out of context. That I think that, and then the stereotypes, of course, that she faced. I think those kinds of things can really be limiting, right? And after that, she was, I think, had to really reframe, or she was instructed how she should kind of approach things. She was given more guidance. I mean, as her husband said, she hadn't been getting a lot of help with that. So I think it's risky, and it depends probably on the context of the first lady, maybe the color of the first lady, maybe the position. Someone like Hillary, perhaps because she was very much known already as a very successful person, lawyer, etc. Maybe that would be kind of an issue that she couldn't speak up. But I'm wondering if when we have a first gentleman, which we may, who knows, I mean, I know not all of you will agree with me on this, but I think that men might have a little more leeway to be a little more maybe aggressive, but we'll see, maybe not. Maybe will they be able to stand out as much, or if they have to hold back as many first ladies have. But looks like you have a question.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we have a question here from Susan Murphy. How will campaigning as a potential first gentleman change the game for spouses, would you guess?
I was answering your question before I'd even read it.
And what I was going to say was thinking about candidate spouses, and when Hillary was running, especially, there were times when Bill was intentionally left behind. They did not want him out on the campaign trail with her because there were too many negatives. So, very intentional about when he should show up and when he really needed to give her the space. And I would see them together in New Hampshire, and it was an interesting jockeying because he was so well known, of course, and she was trying to gain her space. But it'll be very interesting to see now, what are these roles? And every time we talk about elections, I'll hear this, should it be a paid position and so forth. And, it'll be interesting to see if some of that does begin to change if we have a gentleman in the White House.
Nancy, what do you think?
I think from Doug's speech last night that he, as an aspiring first gentleman, gives us a prototype of the fact that I think that they will follow the model that first ladies often do, because let's be very clear, they have attacked very substantive issues in campaigns. Michelle walked back because partly the comment that she made about the first time she was proud to be an American. But I think the style will be different. Doug's style and approach to what he was saying was more humorous, relaxed, a little more assertive. I don't know. I don't know that there will be a substantive change, because then again, whether you're a first gentleman or a first lady, you're not the one who's elected, and you're trying to help your spouse or partner get elected, and that key thing does not change whether it's a man woman or a partner.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's this, despite the fact that, maybe he would have a little more leeway. I think there's this sense of, even last night we saw him humanizing her, right? Talking about, I love her laugh, I love her. We have, joking, and that I think that's been a role that that first ladies have served as well, right? To humanize. So that's important. Yeah. We have Myra's question. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to add that Rosalynn often said in writing and in person, I have to remind myself I'm not the one who was elected. So she was very supportive of Jimmy, to some criticism for feminists, and said, don't you have an original idea? Of course she did, but she was supportive of her husband. Myra's question was about the midterms. Did any of the first ladies have activities during the midterm elections that you recall?
I don't have a specific example at this moment, but I'm quite sure that Michelle Obama did. And I think these were key, right? Because when he came in 2008, he had more support in Congress than later. So it played really a key role. And I think the increasingly first ladies, at least I would say not so much, obviously, Melania Trump, we didn't see as much of that, but they have been very involved. And I think we see this continues through midterms and the campaigns overall at every turn, right? So they're just the days when someone like Florence Harding would be not wanting to be quoted are gone. I think first ladies are expected to be heard, and if they want if they want to do it, like not all do, like Melania Trump, they will be. And I definitely I can find you some examples, Myra, of that, but I'm sorry I don't have them off the top of my head at the moment.
Okay, we're coming up close to the end of the hour. Thank you all for being just incredible communicators and telling the stories of first ladies that we all know and love, actually. So Nancy, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and thank you. And thank you very much.
I would like to thank you for a very interesting panel, which I enjoyed thoroughly. And I'm hoping that you will all watch our announcements, our emails, our Flair webpage, because we have a lot of things coming up. And we have a very exciting development that we're not quite ready to announced yet, but I'll just leave that teaser there. And in September, we have a virtual program coming up with Heath Hardage Lee on her new book. So I hope you enjoyed tonight. I hope you enjoy if you're going to watch the convention tonight. And thank you for joining us.